Okay, we're ready.
All right. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Speak On It. I'm your host, Dom. I got my co host, Tim, with me. And we got a special episode of Awareness Monday when we are shedding light on the mental health of the black men in America. I have Mr. John Stewart with me. I'm going to have Dr. Richard with me. Fellows, welcome to the podcast. We
Thank you
want
for
to
having me.
draw, yes, sir, no problem. Thank you for joining us. We want to draw on you guys' expertise in that field, in that area of. We're just gonna have a couple different questions for you guys. And without further ado, we're just gonna jump right in and get started right with the podcast. So the first question that I wanted to ask, and I think Tim had the same question from either one, and either one of you guys can answer it. But I do want to get both of you guys' opinion on it and perspective on it. Is why do we think that black men are afraid of therapy?
Dr. Cooper, you want to take that one first?
Oh, either or. Any way you want to roll, brother. I'm good. I'm good. If you want me to go first, I'm happy
Yeah,
to.
yeah, go ahead, Dr. Cooper.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, um, so I don't necessarily think that black men are afraid of therapy. I would argue that maybe some are, but I think the problem, personally and professionally, that I see when you have services that aren't uniquely designed from a cultural perspective for black men, then they react accordingly. Part of my professional life has been delivering services to young black males, and when you engage them in certain appropriate kind of ways in terms of understanding culture and other techniques, actually they open up quite a bit. I would argue that because a lot of the therapeutic approaches that I see, and I've been a faculty member for almost 30 years in a clinical program in social work and do other kinds of work. I would say that some of it is a misnomer. If you ask me the question, do black men seek treatment less than their so-called white male counterparts? Well, certainly they do. But as a practitioner, as an educator, as a teacher, I'm also interested in looking at the reasons for that and how those can be addressed. And with the young brothers that I've worked with in schools, in jails, whatever, um, they've done quite well.
Sure. I'm a mental health therapist, and I would say that first and foremost, I think the reluctancy of men in general is something that is not synonymous just to the Black experience in America. I think for sure the way that men are socialized categorically is that we are supposed to um, downplay our feelings and be strong and present a um, I don't want to say hard, but present the impression that we are strong and can handle any emotional challenge that comes to us. And I definitely would agree with Dr. Cooper that for the African American community, the biggest divide or biggest barrier has to lie in the fact that whether it's true or not, that we as a collective society or culture have the opinion that the individual providing the therapy will not recognize or be able to connect with me. Um, and part of the reason, definitely, when you have the African American community in the first place, that's not something that we traditionally hand down to our children. We are more likely to advise our children to speak to our pastor or the leaders in the church about different things that are going on with us emotionally and try to get some advice. But then the second part of this, and there's many reasons for this as well, but even in a circumstance where you have a person coming in for counseling that is an African American male, there often is a disconnect that, hey, this guy who has a master's degree or a PhD is not going to be able to connect with me and understand the challenges that I have going on, because they don't know their experience is not my experience. And that also can be another barrier in bringing people into the counseling office, right?
Great. Can I add a comment before the next question? This is
Sure.
going to be fun. Oh, this is going to be a lot of fun. This is gonna
Yeah,
be
I love
fun.
it.
So look, so another way of looking at it, right? So suddenly in 2020, America's eyes are open to some of the realities of Black and brown people with police literally on their necks. So, so we have this moment in history, not unlike other moments, 60s, 70s, 1992, and so on. I think we also have to look at the reality that Black men, younger and older, find themselves in, where you can be pulled up and killed by a police officer and it justified. So, I'm not really able to fit into the notion that Black men don't seek help. They're being killed, and they've seen historically they don't get support. They don't get support in a system in America, for the issues that not only plague them from a mental health perspective, but are killing us and are killing them. So that unfortunately, I'm not running groups at the moment, but I would love to be talking with young brothers between the ages of, say, 16, 15, and 25, 30, and saying, brothers, what's it like for you to see that America is beginning to get some of your daily lived reality of the stress, the oppression that you're under, the violence, that has been directed towards you and historically justified. So we have a biracial race car driver, a brother by the name of Bubba.
Bubba, yeah.
He decides
Right
he's going to
on.
put on his car Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden we find a noose hanging in his spot.
Yeah, that's
So
just.
there you go. So that's what I'm talking. Let's look at the realities that Black men have to deal with in America. And then if you tell me we are less apt to seek therapy, I may not even disagree with, and I don't mean, you, I mean the collective you in the world. But I would argue that we are oftentimes, our realities are misunderstood. And unfortunately, many of the therapists that go to clinical schools, psychiatric schools, psychology schools, social work schools, counseling schools, they have not been given the tools and or exposed to the reality that all of a sudden is coming to the forefront in terms like implicit bias and all these things that we thought were squashed in 69, 70. Some of the great writers that I've read, Greer Cobbs, who wrote in 68, 69, 70 about Black male rage, or some of the great writers in sociology, psychology that have been capturing what has been going on and what has been happening to Black people for decades, yet we haven't seen a shift in terms of how things are taught, the content, Afrocentric approaches. So I don't disagree about the data that suggests we go less, but from my own experience, when given the opportunity with some of us that are clinically trained to manage their affect, their anger, and underneath that is hurt, fear, sorrow, post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever you want to call it, I find that brothers will open up. And I think the bigger question for me is that, and I'll stop here, how do we create a counseling community and environment that does the appropriate outreach to brothers that will bring them into the services that they clearly need, given their reality.
Right.
Well, kind of to piggyback off of what you were saying, it reminded me of a quote in Dr. Amos's book that said, "The history of the oppressed, as written by the oppressors, shaped the consciousness and the psychology of both oppressed and the oppressor." What effect do you think the education received in school system on the mental development? How do you think that affects the mental development of young Black men?
Well, okay. So I am, I graduated with my master's degree in counseling in 2010. I am just at the final stages of doing my edits for a PhD in counselor education and supervision, right? And so throughout the process of counselor training, um, there is an emphasis on multicultural counseling. And one of those emphasis is for the counselor themselves to get in touch with their own racial biases and be aware that your reality may not be the reality that other people have. And um, in that, counselors themselves are ethically required to, when they have a client who is of a different ethnicity, to consult and get some guidance on the nuances of being able to work with that particular individual. Um, Now, as therapists are in school taking classes and attending multicultural classes, yes, of course, there's discussion about racism and how that may present itself related to depression or any number of mental health conditions. Um, but unfortunately, until you have the experience of working with someone of color and dealing with those things, then yeah, you're at a limited ability to be able to manage that. And so the solution that I see and the solution that I hear from my family members and other minorities that I interact with is, yeah, we need more uh, people with black and brown skin offering services so that individuals will feel comfortable enough to make that first step, get in the door, and then decide whether or not, they can rock with Stu, or whether or not, Stu's not the person for them to meet with. But um, I would say that for all mental health therapists, they get some amount of training, but the training itself is very limited and is not going to prepare them to be able to sit across the room from a minority who is dealing with just depression, and on top of having depression, all of the things with that go along with being a person who is being subjugated by the world, right?
And to Dr. Cooper, you can respond to the question.
Yeah, say it again for me, because
Uh,
I was really
what
listening to the brother's answer, which was a great one. I was really into what he was saying. Give me the question again.
what effect do you think the education system or the education that's received in the school system, how does that affect the mental development of young black men?
Yeah, so I have a master's degree in social work from, I like to say affectionately, the Howard University, and
Go ahead now.
and I have a my PhD is in urban education from Temple University, and then my undergraduate degree is in education as well. So I'm kind of like an education sandwich, if you will, with clinical masters, where I've been teaching for, I don't know, 22, 23 years, and 6 years before that elsewhere. For me, it's just quite simple. The blueprint has already been laid. Carter G. Woodson wrote it in The Miseducation of the Negro, what, 50, 60, 70 years ago. Jawanza Kinjufu wrote it in the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. Or, I mean, and then if you want to talk about it in hip hop, which was what my dissertation research was in, we've seen these outcries. We've seen the information that has been out there for arguably, decades. It's just that there's no required reading list in the schools that I either teach at or attend, and yet we are overrepresented in dropout rates, incarceration, all the stuff that we know and we talk about and we lament over time and time again. But for me, it's a structural problem, some of which is by design. And in fact, I would flip it this way. The mere fact that we have as many young brothers and older men that make it to certain ages still alive speaks to their strength of survival, despite a system that we allow, as Amos Wilson, the late great Dr. Amos Wilson would have pointed out, or many others, the mere fact that they have survived these systems despite inadequate resources that are known, that are common, speaks to their strength. So
Right.
the question that I raise for myself is then how do we come at it in such a way where we can help what are arguably the survivors of implicit poverty and racism? Oftentimes we see the overrepresentation trapped in urban centers, yet simultaneously these brothers and sisters are the progenitors of hip hop in what, late 70 in my era in college, yet we still are the biggest contributors to entertainment, to science, just about to any field, despite how we've been insulted and assaulted in other institutions. So I'm interested, while I am very much committed to talking about and analyzing the problem, if you will, I always also like to focus on the hope. So the fact that Jay-Z is talking about therapy from 2017 and 2018, and he dedicated one of his albums to like therapy with the mistake that he made in public, and now you have OGs like Jay-Z saying therapy helped me. And you all remind me of the name of the other young brother, Kid Cody or something, who talked
Kid
about
Cody.
depression.
Kid
And
Cudi, yeah, Kid
he
Cudi.
created a hashtag, and I imagine just from that one social media movement that he got some young brothers and sisters to consider their own depression and anxiety far more than any academic or any other person did, and saying, hey, this was cool, it helped me, and you all need to check it out. So I just always want to allude to the hope that I see with young brothers and sisters, and not always focus on the problems and the pathology. We have to solve them, but I don't want to end there.
And not just like you said, Jay-Z, but we've seen it touching other realms, like in sports. We're a sports show. I mean, they talk about cultural stuff, but we talk about DeMar DeRozan, who was talking about how he suffered from mental health. I mean, then you see Kevin Love and talk about how he suffered from mental health.
Right.
And then we talk about LeBron James, and LeBron James talks about how he spends, almost $1 million just getting his mind right. I
remember when the Lakers won their NBA championship and Ron Artest was on the team. On the podium, Ron Artest is naming his psychologist that he had been working with, over the last year to be able to deal with all of his demons and how that reverberated within our collective community, right? And so, yes, there are different times, different people that, have the spotlight that do speak to it. And I would definitely say that the use of therapeutic services is growing, but yeah, it still is taboo and has that, unwelcome connotation to it, like there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I even with what you were saying earlier, it's Richard Majors wrote a book, 10. I'm always going to go to the literature, and particularly when it's written by either some folks that address us in a non-pathological way, they could be black, white, yellow, brown, or to specific literature that specifically explores and gets underneath the surface. Dr. Richard Majors read a book simply entitled Cool Pose, and it was to do exactly what the good brother said about getting underneath the posture of being hard or tough, and how, what's being emulated there. Long before gangster rap and hip hop, there still was this notion that you have to be hard, tough, you can't cry, you can't admit to certain things. But yet
Right.
what we find is that once you find a way to get underneath that veneer, you'll find post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, pain, suffering, the impact of institutional racism. And so for me as a teacher, as a practitioner, I want to teach people, well, how do you get underneath the surface of that? And what helps brothers to open up? Even some of this was in my generation, and I grew up in a semi-rural environment before I started working in DC, living in Philly and other cities. I mean, brothers have been taught, if you look at me the wrong way, dude, what are you looking at? Who, the language might change. Are you fronting? They might call it something slightly different than what my generation did, but it means stop looking at me. But underneath that is, I would argue, is pain. I would argue that there is some trauma. I would argue that there also could be some clinical depression. So we can't just look at the individuals without looking at the society that we find that Black men are in, that produce what we are seeing on the individual realm, the anger, the rage, the frustration that will spill over into the other kind of pathological behaviors. But my argument, albeit somewhat passionate, is that some of this is by design in the society. And it is for those of us who know not to simply label our own as resistant or just bad guys or, whatever. Because what I see even working with young boys, Jawanza Kinjufu wrote about it in terms of what he called the fourth grade failure syndrome, that young boys are disproportionately reprimanded, taken out of programs, punished in the fourth grade, disciplined in ways that their white counterparts never get, have police in their schools where that's normalized, even in third or fourth grade. Like, come on. So it's, unless we look at some of the systemic factors, we're always going to blame, in my mind, at least to me, the victims of certain things in the society, as opposed to addressing the ills in the society itself.
I think that one of the things that would aid as far as that would be to have more Black male educators. One of the things that I know from my positive experience is that in 11th grade, I had a teacher by the name of Mr. Tweedy, and he was a Black teacher, and a lot of the Black students gravitated towards him and talked to him, and he talked to us in our language, in a sense. And he created a club called Umoja, which was based off of unity. And just having that family and camaraderie, I don't know the big word, I guess, but just having that unity and understanding that we had somebody that was a teacher that was for us, it really sparked something in me. And what's funny is that he wasn't actually a teacher of mine per se, but he was a teacher that looked like me, that understood me, and had the best interests. And that was one of the positive things I took out of my childhood, and just knowing that the effect that he had on the people around me, the males as well, especially, I think that plays a major part in helping us develop as young men.
So the one thing I was going to ask, the question I was going to ask, and I'm glad Tim brought that up and hit on it, is how the environment that you're in or what you see affects the mental health of the Black male. The one thing here's the question I'll ask is, how does the environment that you're in contribute to PTSD?
So my dissertation is on attachments. Attachments is a theory by Bowen and Ainsworth, and attachment says that based on the relationship that you have at a very early age, by the time you're 3 years old, based on the relationship that you have with your primary caregivers, then you create, in a sense, a blueprint of how you're going to build relationships with other people, right? And so out of that, you're going to establish either one of 4 recognized type of attachment styles. Securely attached. A securely attached child will explore a surrounding, and when they encounter something frightening, they will return to their parents and expect that the parents are going to protect them and soothe them. You have the anxious, ambivalent child who explores a environment, and when they encounter something frightening, they will freeze. And then when their parents come to try to comfort them, the child does not receive comfort from their parent. The third is the avoidant child. When this child gets afraid and the parent attempts to try and come to comfort them, the child flees from the parent. And then the fourth is the confused attachment, where you could have any of the three responses from that individual, right? What we know about attachments, we, the collective we, the field of psychology, right? What we know about attachments is that based on the attachments that you have with your family members, if you have secure attachment based on your experience with your family members, then you will have the ability to be able to um, take a risk in a relationship to um, form healthy relationships with other people. If you have insecure or anxious attachment with your family, then you will have difficulty being able to be in relationships with other individuals. So definitely trauma in your childhood is going to, number one, trauma is the primary impetus in the development of personality disorders. When we have personality disorders, they are that individual trying to make sense of the world in the best way that they can. But because of trauma, it's going to definitely interrupt your ability to be able to create long-lasting relationships with other people. It's going to impact your ability to be able to trust and perceive that people are looking out for your best interests. And so, yes, this does, in fact, make it more difficult for the African American male who, yeah, let's face it, by the time we are in our mid 20s, there is quite a likelihood that we have suffered. Um, there's big trauma, there's trauma with the big T. You've been physically abused, and then trauma with the little t, where, all right, people have really just repeatedly let you down or hurt your feelings and kept you from being able to trust. And so, yes, this definitely will get in the way of your ability to be able to connect with other people. And when you take that into the counseling office or in a counseling relationship, then it is very important that it is most important in that counseling relationship that you see that therapist that you're meeting with as an attachment figure that you feel safe with, that you feel like this is a person that, although my mom and dad did not provide me with that foundational relationship that I can trust in and rely on, this therapist is somebody that I can connect with and I can form that attachment with, and I can explore the world around me. And when I get in trouble, when I'm in fear, there's somebody that I can trust, that I can go to, and they're going to give me some amount of reassurance that I am okay. You follow?
Yes, sir.
Right on.
Yeah, I would say, Stewart, I agree. I ran back in the day in Philly, in north central Philly. There was a high school still there, Ben Franklin High School. 99.9% black on any given day of the week. And it isn't so much that the school was black, it was impoverished. And so that we're in a system where students don't have the opportunity like they should to pursue black excellence because they have a lack of resources. See, I grew up in a rural, small little town back in the day, right? About, I don't know, maybe about 94% white, about 5% black. When your brother or sister didn't go to school that day, the percentage dropped drastically. So it's having even come from that environment where I had some very good teachers, let me first say for the record, but then I also had a counselor that told me because I was colored that I couldn't make it to college. That was basically the principle. That was the whole idea, the whole rationale. And so as I started working in urban centers, Philly, DC, parts of Coatesville, Camden, when you start to go into the urban neighborhoods and you see the disparities in the school, like I remember adult said to me in January that, look at these kids, they think they cool. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, they walking around with their coats on and their hats. And I'm like, look, yo, they don't got heat. Come on, player. Like, quit playing. They don't think they're cool. They're trying to be warm. I saw in the school, in impoverished schools where they normalized students not having books. They wrote all of the homework on the blackboard because they didn't have enough books for each of their students. Yet, if I go a block over or 2 blocks up to a magnet school or to some other special school, all of a sudden the resources are abundant. We cannot allow, as the other brother pointed out, our children to continue to be traumatized. And a lot of times, brothers and sisters, they're just trying to survive. And so if Black lives really matter, since that's the motif of the day, and everybody's singing about Black Lives Matter, and I don't mean it in a hater way.
No, right.
If it's really important, then we will begin to go back and look at other aspects of Black lives that we cannot allow to continue the disparity. And we can for once not just quote the numbers of Black people being overrepresented in jail. How did this happen? How did we get here? And why does it continue? Why does there continue to be this cycle? I would argue because we allow, and when I say we, just like the brother said, I mean the collective we allow inadequate resources. We allow us to get the last. We allow us to have to fight for, in the inner cities, a lot of times, the mere basics when we know we are in situations where we do not have one half of the resources that the better schools have that oftentimes are a slightly different hue or a slightly different economic range. And so therefore, when you go back to the original question, which was, yeah, we are a product of our environment. Look, let me say this. I could be called a statistic myself. Like, I'm not supposed to be here doing this show with you guys.
Preach, brother, preach.
Like, I'm not even supposed to be here. My father at 25, more or less, shoots himself in front of me at 25 and burns down our home. I'm not even supposed, I'm supposed to be a statistic of a mother who went to the 9th grade. I am supposed to be a statistic of a person who wasn't the best athlete, was a second string basketball player, maybe third, depending on the school, but yet I'm still here. And why is that? Because there were other caring adults called extended family, kinfolk, uncles, grandparents who stepped in. And while we didn't always have the money, which we didn't, in fact, I would argue we didn't have the money, there was extended family that were able to provide. We ate at my grandmother's house a lot of the time. I wasn't one of those kids that grew up saying I didn't know that we were poor. Now I knew. No, hold up. I knew. But yet how we were able to survive was, and you mentioned it earlier, brother, was extended family, was a small AME church, were these other, institutions that kind of stepped in and kind of supported us in the ways that we needed to be supported in that time. And so when I look at it, even in my own life, where do these structures exist for young people? If they are there, and they are there for some, arguably, but for a lot of young brothers and sisters, they're not there. So again, the way that I'm going to keep looking at it is that what can I do to help change the environment? That all I need is a rec center. Sometimes it's open between the hours of 4 to 11 o'clock at night. Don't have to have much. It has to have a safe environment, some caring adults, and help get young brothers and sisters off the street between the hours of 3 p.m. and 9 o'clock at night when a lot of the bad stuff will go down. We're just trying to get them in a space to be safe and comfortable and even maybe learn and have some recreation and so on. That can change the course of their life. Just those mere little acts, despite all of the resources that they don't have access to.
And I think that you basically touched base on the second part of it is how does the visual aid of what you actually see in your environment shape or play a part in your PTSD. I mean, so say like if I come from a impoverished neighborhood, you know what I mean, where I see nothing but boarded up housing, or if I see nothing but drug packages on the street, how does that shape or impact your PTSD as well, to the point where it says, I don't know if I can get out of this environment, or this is all I will ever be?
Yes, the old school classic. It's been flipped 3 times. It's like a jungle sometime, and whoever's redone the redo, you know, or Man Child in the Promised Land would be the book to read, or 5 or 10 Monster, the book Monster, that looks at, well, how in the heck do you come from these environments and expect to be halfway sane and to survive? A lot of times we're seeing people that are trying to overcome these obstacles. And again, I refuse, and I say this to my students all the time, what we claim is normal for some air quotes, Black inner city kids ain't normal. And I refuse to normalize the madness and the deprivation. And I refuse to overly pathologize my own people when in fact it's the society I have more of a beef with, if you will, than I do the young brothers and sisters that are trying to cope and to survive. And I would argue that, you know, if I were growing up in this era, my pants would sag too if I didn't have a grandparent saying, boy, what you doing? You know what I mean? And you better, like, you got to go to church and you ain't gonna look like it. If you don't have some immediate standard, I remember once, and then I don't want to take up all the time. I said to my grandfather, I was foolish. About 16, I said, dude, I think I could take you.
Oh.
And he's about 5'7", $140. He was about 5'7", $140, soaking wet. And I just remember what he said to me, you know, and I just never brought that up again. You know, he was a carpenter, and I realized, you know, how foolish that sounded. But it let me know that there was a checks and balance. He didn't even have to lay hands on me to let me know. I may have thought I was becoming a big dog, you know, figuratively, but boy, I'm gonna lay something on you if you're gonna be so foolish, you know, to challenge another grown man, you know, because you think, and it's those kind of checks and balances. And it doesn't even have to be physical. I like what the brother said about, because I teach the same content in human behavior. When you can provide a loving, caring object, person, therapist for the person to connect to, feel safe, feel understood, despite what they have or haven't gotten, the therapeutic process can be the thing that changes their lives as well. By a caring, skilled therapist, doesn't matter to me a lot of times whether they're Black and brown. I just want them to understand that young brother and sister and to help them to heal over time through trust, which is the process that you described.
So I want to welcome Dr. LaShawn Waters to the podcast.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
Hey,
awesome.
Waters.
Before we move forward, I just wanted to reiterate the question that I had, and the question is, how does your environment shape your PTSD or affect the PTSD that we all go through as Black men in the community? So say if you're coming from an impoverished neighborhood or boarded up homes or stuff like that, how does that affect or mess with the PTSD that we all go through?
And what I wanted to add to what Dr. Cooper said was really that, you know, first, Dom, specifically, that environment that we grow up in, that is where we develop our view of our potential. And when you grow up in an environment where everyone's potential is stunted, then you expect that your potential is going to be low as well. But one of the things that we as a society always do, is look for other things to encourage us. And so one of the things that I try to, that I want to see us do um, as academics is to maintain that connection to our communities so that our young people are not just looking at LeBron James, Jay-Z, and um, Little Kim or whoever the hot rapper performer is right now, Little Weezy. Not just looking at them as the people that they are trying to emulate, because there are lots of good role models in your neighborhood that are very accessible and can help you develop that positive idea. Just like Dr. Cooper said, he is not supposed to be where he's at. And brother, I can tell you, growing up in the 302, I know that I am not supposed to be sitting here a stone's throw away from having a PhD, because this system ain't developed to help me succeed. And so the fact that I am here is, just like you said, Dr. Cooper, it speaks to the number of, first and foremost, the number of time my mama, my grandmama, my aunt got down on their knees and prayed for me, the number of times my collective church family put me in the center of the circle and laid hands and prayed on me and uplifted me, the number of times that any number of people in my community just spoke to me and just said, hey, I mean, just simple as uh, being at places that I didn't have no business being at age 17, 18. Hey, ain't you Don and Hattie's son? Boy, you know you're not supposed to be over here. You better get your ass out of here right now. And if I see you here again, I'm going to tell your mom and dad. So don't let me catch you here again. Just those little things like that, just the community saying, hey, listen, you're on a good path. Let's stay on a good path. And that is what we need, right?
I think one of the things that you just said is a topic for another show, but I wanted to just emphasize it before we move forward, is how the community doesn't police its own anymore. Like what you said, like we take problems, or we see problems with a neighbor trying to discipline or correct our kids nowadays, and I feel as though that's one of the issues and one of the problems that we actually do have.
Right, sure. And this, I gave a speech a few weeks ago at a social social justice rally, and one of the things that I talked about specifically is apathy is a big problem throughout America. Apathy gives white Americans lots of reasons why they should look away, but apathy within the Black community, we have many of us who are doing well, and we are apathetic to those who are still in the struggle. And that is a problem that we have to deal with. Many of us are still very apathetic about the local and national political process that we need to stay engaged in, right? Because yes, voting for the president affects our lives, but also voting for your mayor and your governor, that affects those people who are going to be touching your life directly, whereas the chief of police and your state prosecutor and your local prosecutor, but very often we don't attend to those type of things. So yes, that is very important, as you said, Don.
So I did want to let Ms. Waters give her input on the question. If you need me to repeat it, I can do that as well.
I know you were speaking about PTSD and how does our environment influence that? Is that
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Um, geez. So I think anything that we go through is, something that shapes us. And, even if we don't have the words to articulate at a young age, we are still recording those things as we are, age 1, 2, and 3. And so what we see during that time frame can really tell us how we think the world works. And then we actually get out in the world to see how we experience it. And that's when, that dissonance starts to happen. So it really depends on that first social network when we're at home and what we see there. And then after that, I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but
No, no.
after that, when the world kind of beats us up, I think the difference between those two is what can have that influence. Speaking on PTSD of today, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like we're in a constant state of mourning, and that the things that happen these days are just rehashing an old wound that has always been there. And so that's when we need those resources to just help us out with that, because we might not know that that wound is still there until something happens. And then, that punch in the ribs is like, okay, oh yeah, that's how that feels. So now we have to, relive all of that back then and then bring it to the here and now.
I think I would say that take a walk with me over Ferris School. Just take a walk with me, a drive, right up the street. That's where I did my PhD dissertation 15, 20 years ago, whatever. And I'm sitting and talking with young brothers between the ages of 13 and 14 and 17 and 18. And when you just hear them talk about the trauma in their lives, you understand why they're there and how they got there. And I would argue they shouldn't be there, because if they would have had the kind of supports, the systematic support in their life, and looking at the fact that their mothers and fathers have been traumatized too, and have been struggling and fighting against insurmountable odds, oftentimes not unlike my own mother, not to put her on blast, but there were teenage parents, not to put mom on blast, but she was 16, 17 years of age, single, and just struggling, trying to make it. And in my case, we had the grandparents living a couple houses away. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today without their support. And so when we look at some of these systemic factors, there's another book, and I reference books only because as an academic, I find that oftentimes even the newer books that are being written by righteous African-American brothers and sisters, they ain't being read in the schools where they should be taught. The post-traumatic slave syndrome by Joy DeGroy, that looks at, you don't even have to agree with it, but she explores, she says, well, look at the historical trauma that enslaved people have gone through. And then, hey, do you think that might have had an impact on how we parent our children and and when you start to read it, it'll make you go, because, my mother said, don't you look at me. We couldn't look or move. And if you just substitute my mother out of the picture and put a slave master and don't look at me, don't flinch, and so this intergenerational trauma and our ability to, I want to always though go back to our ability to survive and to thrive despite what we have been through. We're still here would be the way of saying it, but it doesn't imply that we don't have work to do. The problem that I have more as an academic is that we're not able to train people with the right information that will help them to go out into the streets and help our people to heal. And even if you're in the middle class and you grew up, or upper middle class, and you grew up and all the aesthetics are white. I remember asking my dear sweet grandmother in the AME church, why are all the angels white, Grandma? She's like, baby, we don't talk about that, baby. It doesn't matter. Well, it matters. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't make them all white. And so we also have to deal with colorism in our own race and all these other things as a result of ongoing and current institutionalized racism and self-hatred that we see in our race of people because of the trauma that we're under. And if we are now in this window or moment with Black Lives Mattering for a minute, nationally, locally, and I don't mean that to be facetious, I just know that everything has a beginning and ending, and you're not going to see it on the wide scale realm that we see it in right now, where interracial bodies are marching and protesting. Folks I ain't never seen I'm still baffled in a pleasant way. When I was downtown Wilmington protesting and I took my daughter, it was just deep to see non-Black people with Black Lives Matter shirt on and seeming, at least for those moments, to be serious, at least kinda. And I was like, wow. So what do we do in these moments to help America to better see some of the realities and some of the struggles of Black people? And not unlike both of the two of you were talking about, whether it's voting or trying to understand it, we have to maximize this opportunity, because when I'm long gone in 30 years, you'll be doing another panel saying, wow, there was, it'll be some new slogan, but it'll still be about Black oppression and how we still suffer collectively as a people.
Well, just to touch on what all of you guys have pretty much said, I was actually watching, I know Dr. Cooper may like this, Cannon's class with Nick Cannon. And he had two professors from Howard University, and it was Dr. Carr and Dr. Washington, and they were talking about
Kwaku Carr from Howard. Got his PhD at Temple.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They were talking about what does mental health actually mean to us, and one of the things that was stated was when Miss Waters was speaking, was about the continuance of it, and he had a term where he said it's persistent enslavement, systemic trauma, an ongoing problem. And it made me think about, as far as genetically, just looking into some of the lectures, or not even lectures, but listening to Brother Polite speak about epigenetics and how the genetics can be affected as far as traumatic history going through your ancestors, and how that can also be coming down to you. Just a continuous cycle. It just makes me wonder, how can it change? One of the things, as far as Black men, how can that change? Because we are supposed to be the quote unquote patriarchs coming up, and we're supposed to be the leaders and the quote unquote heads of households. And one of the things that I touched on earlier, and I'll pose a question, is looking at the stats. It says 38.7% of African Americans under 18 live with both parents. And in 2018, there were about 4.04 Black families in the United States with a single mother. So how does the presence of a father or a positive male figure help in the mental development of Black boys growing up?
Well, okay. So, Dr. Waters, do you want to take this one first?
So we're talking about the presence of a father in the household. What's that influence? There was so much that I was listening to. I just want to make sure I'm answering.
Yes, either a father figure, or a father, or just a positive male figure.
I mean, there's so much to be said about having that example. So, a mother can say certain things, but being able to see that model in another man is just something that, even though moms would do their best, it's unmatched. And so if that man is there, he can tell their children from experience, as well as what they went through. And I think it's also important for kids to see the coordination at the same time between both parents, because then they learn that even though there's discord, there can also be resolution. And so I think just seeing, again, recording all of that can really be like a sustaining factor, is what we call it. And just adding to that resilience. Let's see what else. Yeah, it's just unmatched. I mean, I'm just going to keep it simple. It can be done, and single parent families can be successful, but you can't deny the presence of both parents, both influences, and seeing how an intact family can work, even though, I even came from that environment. And I turned out fine, but still, there's things that I didn't see that I had to learn later. And that's probably why I'm a therapist. So,
I know.
Good, Dr.
I didn't
Stu?
catch it. Oh, okay. So from an attachment theory perspective, right? Attachment theory, recent research with well, let me back up here. Historically, attachment theory has been predicated on the relationship that the child had with their mother, okay? And the mother has historically been the primary attachment figure focused on in research. But now we are branching out and looking at more closely the influence of fathers. And what attachment research is now ferreting out is that, just like Dr. Waters said, there are some attachment things that mom is going to be more likely responsible for, and some attachment lessons that dad is going to be more likely responsible for. But you can have a successful attachment relationship or attachment um, blueprint, so to speak, even if you only have in a household where mom and dad are both there and you have a good relationship with mom and you don't have a good relationship with dad. You only need one significant primary caretaker to have that good relationship to be able to form healthy attachments outside of the home, right? That being said, again, as Dr. Waters pointed out, the influence of fathers is receiving more and more research now because the field of psychology research is recognizing that we have a lot of research that's been built on the relationships that children have with mothers, and we want to understand what the variance is with the influence of dads being in the picture. And so that still has to be developed and figured out. But just from a rudimentary perspective, research does time over time say that if you grow up in a two-parent household, then you are much better socially adjusted. And again, speaking back to what Dr. Waters said, I think it's because you get that yin and the yang. You get mom and dad both providing you with influence, and more importantly, you get to see a couple at work and what that looks like, right? Because that's very important in our ability to be successful individuals, right? And from my own personal experience, one of the greatest things that I learned from my stepfather is that being a man doesn't mean that, all right, I've got to always have the last word and I've got to put my thumb down on my wife and she's got to, bring me my bedroom slippers as soon as I walk in the door, right? Being a man, hey, you can still be the man and the head of the house and be able to defer and say, all right, well, hey, you know what? I'm not going to make a decision there. You run with that one. If you want to, you take it, you handle it. And that is being a man as well, right?
Yep.
I wanted to add something in if I can.
Yep, yes, ma'am.
So when I'm working with clients and they are questioning, whether to stay in a relationship just for their children or whether to, perhaps be healthier apart, but still have that co-parenting relationship. The one thing I wanted to add is that I don't always say stay together for, the children, because it needs to be a healthy environment.
Sure.
I think children need to see health, and, but if it's toxic and abusive and all of that, I don't ever just say, oh, but a 2-parent household is what you need. So I just wanted to, make sure that I wasn't just being all or nothing with that.
Sure. Right
Oh,
on.
I think circumstances and situations dictate that. So
Very
like you
much
said,
so.
if you see a healthy environment, if being together is unhealthy for the kids, that's not what they need to see. But if you can work it out, and come to some agreement with, like you're saying, then I think that separation is a necessary part of that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show.
Yes, sir.
Please
Oh,
have
that's
me
a whole
back for
nother
that
show.
one, would you?
Okay. Definitely.
That is
I'll
for
give a
sure.
2-minute.
Sign me up.
That is for sure.
It's one way I see it is that there's not one shoe that fits all. And so if you look at the archetype of our African, its identity, and it's hybrid, it's changing. We're not the same Africans that we were, 7 generations ago, whether we're, up south or from the north or what have you. But if you look at historical archetypes, this paradigm of the nuclear family wasn't necessarily the African. There was not one African
Right.
way of doing things. If you look at it
Yes.
in terms of the
That's a
diversity.
good point, Dr. Cooper.
Yeah, leadership was shared. And so I don't need to be the head of my household over my partner. Like
Right.
that doesn't interest me. I want to maximize her strengths and her capabilities. And so I don't have to follow that worldview or that ethos. I do if it's been glorified that I'm supposed to have 2.5 children, pick a fence, and a dog. But since I didn't grow up in that reality. So, if I'm teaching my students and they say, well, you're going to keep it 100, Doc, I'm going to be like, well, technically, some would say I came from a so-called broken family. But despite that, it was in part from the strength of my mother, who was still connected to other strong men and women, not all of whom were healthy, but at least I saw different archetypes, different personalities. What they were committed to was that my mother's children, which was us, making it and surviving and thriving. And so I think that when you've only been exposed to a nuclear, westernized, Eurocentric paradigm, then and Billingsley wrote about this in the Black family, in his book on the Black family, and talked about a fictive kin, how Black folks will call somebody auntie or uncle or cousin or play cousin or brother or sister, and they ain't even biologically related. In fact, some of you at your wedding or future celebration, you'll have relatives and you'll say, wait a minute, that's not my blood kinfolk. Like, no. So that I guess I want to lend to the discussion that I would hope in the present times that we don't fall prey to an older model that is often a Western model that says the man should be the head of the household. I'm not interested in that model. I don't espouse that model. I think my wife is probably listening somewhere. I cook rather well and grocery shop. That's not a feminine thing. That is a how we going to live kind of a thing.
Right.
She likes gardening. I don't put a gender on it. Otherwise, I would be relegated to cutting the lawn, and she would be relegated to fixing the food and doing these other things that have been ascribed to her that we don't necessarily have to buy into. You do have to negotiate roles, and you do have to be open to having some conversations about, well, who's going to do what? We need to get some things done, but they're not particularly feminized or masculinized. And so just a short point, it was beautiful. What was it, yesterday or the day before, to see a cascading of thank yous for men as fathers, real fathers, blood fathers, play fathers. And for me, just from an African perspective or an Afrocentric perspective, just to see men who are stepping up and to see men, no matter what my relationship is or was with your mama, that I'm still available to you, both economically and or physically, to help guide and support you. And so I would say I want to emulate these other models and these other ways of being in relationships that aren't so patriarchal, where I got to be large and in charge and dominant and controlling and the only, personally for me, and I got a birthday in a couple of days where I'll be 62. I'm just trying to make it to 62. And if I take on all of those so-called Western Eurocentric traditional values, I don't think I'm going to make it. And I don't think a lot of us will.
I think that's a great point that you talked about. And again, as we were saying, that's a topic for another show. But I do want to address it. It's one of the things I call dual leadership in the household. And what that means is that exactly what you said, Dr. Cooper, is that just because I'm a man doesn't mean that I have to be the sole provider, or just because I'm the woman doesn't mean that I have to take on all the household duties. No, what dual leadership says is that if you are good in this area, then that's the area that we're going to put you in. If the husband is a great cook, I'm not going to say, well, it's not my place to be in the kitchen. Yeah, I mean, if my if my wife is good with the finances, I'm not going to say, well, I need to take care of all of the finances. No, dual leadership says that I understand where your strength is and where my weakness is, and that because you're strong in this area, then that's where you're going to be at. And because I'm strong in this area, then that's where I'm going to be at. Whether it's, I mean, dealing with the kids or dealing with finances or cooking or whatever, that's what dual leadership looks like, and that's how it should be.
Well, since you guys are on the topic of cooking, I'll ask another question that I have. Now, one of the things that just been on my journey that I know that has affected me as far as my mental health state is the way that I eat. And I noticed that when I started to eat more healthier and started to implement more plant-based products, I began to get more energized. And just reading up on different herbs and different supplements, one of the supplements, Irish sea moss. I started taking that, and I seen how it does affect your mental health and whatnot. So how do you guys think the way that you eat and your fitness plays a part in Black men's health, mental health, I should say?
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Dr. Waters. We'll let you go ahead if you'd
Anyone
like.
can
You
anyone
know,
can
I
go
am
ahead.
not a doctor yet, but y'all are speaking into
Yeah, listen, we
existence. So
speaking right
I want
into
to do it.
existence.
There you
Yeah,
go. Get it,
I only
sister. Get
correct
it.
people one time. No, it's fine. So, I mean, nutrition is the fuel, and so if you're not fueling your body in the right way, it's going to be like trying to get to New York on a quarter tank. Like it's just not going to happen. So, what I usually recommend is definitely hydrating, but having things that can energize you through the day, but that are not heavy. Um, Not to get on a whole kick, but yes, you know, plant-based, like Tim said, is it's not what I do on 100% of the time, but I try to keep it in mind that it is important. But just having that discipline so that you're not weighed down by, you know, grease and carbs and all of that can have an influence. But also getting your fruits and vegetables, drinking water, like those things that they tell us to do that they don't sound fun, but I mean it's necessary. You know, when I'm eating better, I do have a clearer mind and I can get through my day just more successfully, and also like a more sustainable energy as opposed to these like big crashes and falls because of perhaps the sugar content of, you know, caffeine or these other drinks. So I think I look at things from a holistic standpoint. So, you know, mind, body, spirit, you know, I have incense on right now. I use essential oils, like all of those things matter so that I can go through my day and not pour from an empty cup.
So about 2 years ago, I went to a training conference on psychopharmacology, and I was astounded the way the clinician broke down the importance of diet and how it relates to mental health. Um, the, your body, yes, is a machine, and there are certain dietary requirements that your body needs in order to be able to generate various chemicals that the brain needs in order to complete various functions. Um, and as much as it pains me to say it, a lot of those things don't come from steak, right? Um, So, yes, it is very important for you to eat your veggies. And I am very impressed over the last couple of years that it really seems like the African American community is recognizing that, hey, a diet focused mainly on meat is not really the best thing for us. And so, all of those primary main nutrients that your body needs in order to be able to maintain a healthy mood and to reduce your anxiety, yeah, you're going to get those from a plant based diet. So, yes, it is very important for you to attend to what you're eating. And do you have to never eat McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or anything like that? I mean, yeah, we're boycotting all Darden's places right now. I know, so don't start yelling at me, okay? But anyways, we can still have that sometimes, but yes, we need to make sure that we are eating healthy. And then on top of that, definitely when we exercise on a regular basis, then that is helping our body to also heal and regulate our mood in other ways. So, diet and exercise are important ways for us to be able to manage our mental health, and they do have its place, right? And so that is extremely important.
And just to interject, I've been one that I was not a fan of vegetables, and my I have to give credit to my wife. My wife has made every type of plant taste delicious to the point to where I've eaten things I've never heard of.
Right.
So I definitely credit her, because I wouldn't be on this journey as far as plant-based anything.
Right.
Trust me, I if I seen anything green, no, I'm gonna move that to the side. If it wasn't if it wasn't collard greens, I wouldn't be eating it. But
Right.
I definitely credit her as far as the just everything. I've eaten everything from zucchini, cheesy bread to you name it. It's yeah. So go ahead, Dr. Cooper.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm from the school of trying to keep it 100. And so there are certain things by design that seem to be proliferating with Black folks, and I haven't
Yes.
escaped
Glad
any
we
of
talk
that.
about it.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, renal stuff. And I noticed, and then there's aesthetics that we have. They may be cultural, they may be historical, but we had special names for people with certain figures, like she fat, yo, you know what I mean? And so we have to go back and look at our own aesthetics and beauty and attractiveness, and not necessarily try to emulate something that we're not supposed to do, but we have to be healthier. And I can remember hearing the stories about diabetes running our family, and so got their leg cut off. And then you reach an age where the doctor has told you 5 times that unless you drop some weight, you're going to have diabetes. But the thing is that even for myself, educated and all of that, it took probably I was this time a year and a half ago about 35 pounds heavier. And it wasn't until that final time when the doctor was like, okay, I got some pills for you. It's you're right there with type 2 diabetes. And then all of a sudden it sinks in and you go like, what? And then you're scared. You know what I mean? You're frightened all of a sudden. I dropped the weight. I haven't been close to it, but I have some of the other stuff. So that what we have to do is that we have to figure out how to get to people earlier. We have to, while the same soul food, if you look at it historically, is what saved us, being given table scraps and turning it into a delicacy with seasoning and salt and all of that. By the same token, the access that poorer people have to cheaper foods. I learned what food insecurity was when I was in a master's program. It was just a fancy way of saying you ran out of food somewhere, about 3/4 through the month. We began eating more of the French fries, more of the hot dogs, the cheaper foods back then. My grandmother made a meatloaf that I swear had to be made out of about 4 loaves of bread. and you might as well just put butter and jelly on that joint because there couldn't have been any meat in that meatloaf, anyway. So that we have to go back now, and I don't want to get preachy about it because that shuts people off. But I'll say, as you said a few moments ago, I switched my diet. I'm eating more meat-free, vegan, holistic health food. I'm making my palate change because if I don't, the alternative is that I'm going to be dead. And we have to figure out how we can help people with that earlier in life, as opposed to hoping they get to be, my age and not as healthy as I should have been earlier on, even with carrying more weight. And we were just big dudes, I called my brother late at night 5 years ago. Yo, what you doing, man? I'm making apple cobbler. Get out of here, 2 a.m. Day one for me, yo. My brother's baked, and the problem is we eat the whole pie, So we have to look at those. They feel good while they're going down with the a la mode, but they're killing us. We're not going to be in the family pictures. When you start to see you disappearing from the family picture earlier than what you should, then we have to begin to change our habits as a survival skill before it's too late. And I'm in there, right? I'm happy that the young brothers and sisters are saying tranquility and dealing with stress and taking it seriously. And I used to eat, 2, 3 certain kind of burgers, and now I'm eating the vegan ones and saying, well, that's not too bad. I can tolerate that. At least I'm telling myself that.
And it's crazy because I'm glad Tamon brought that question up, because I just came off of a 21-day no meat challenge, and like you said, it
How was that 22nd day?
22nd day was today, and I'm gonna keep it real. I did eat my first meal was a Chick-fil-A chicken English muffin sandwich, but when I was doing it, you don't think that you can do it, but when you start to lose the weight and you start to feel more energetic and you start to have a clearer mind, and then you I'm like Dr. Cooper, when I start eating vegan burgers and stuff like that, it's like, well, it's not that bad. And I got to the point where I'm like, man, I don't think I would ever, I don't care if I would ever go back to eating meat. I'm not saying that I won't, but it's not a necessity of mine. It's not a necessity of mine. I mean, if I never had another piece of meat again in my life, I would be okay. I would be fine with it, because of the other benefits that it came from. One of the things that you guys talked about, is just the cultural aspect of it, where we are as an early age, we say that soul food is our staple. That's what we've been grown up to think. I mean, that we should eat the mac and cheese, and we should eat the fried chickens, and we should eat those things. And I think that that's also plays a part in our mental aspect as well, because culturally that's what we've been taught. And we love culture. We want to say we try to attach ourselves with something, and as a Black community, that's what we attach ourselves to. The soul food, that's what we attach ourselves to, and it's hard to get away from that thing. But if you just, start choosing the healthier options, you'll understand that there are other options out there for us.
But then that goes into something different as far as culture. I mean, like the culture that we had before we got here, we can like, what was that culture? You know what I mean? Because if we're talking about soul food, like Dr. Cooper said, we were pretty much taking the scraps and making a delicacy. That's not really culture. That's
Right.
really doing what you had to do.
Surviving.
Exactly.
That's surviving.
So you know what I mean? Making it off surviving is what got us to here. So now how can we change to evolve better as a people?
And part of it is by doing what you guys are doing, having young brothers, in a podcast saying, well, let's begin to get some of this, out there. I mean, in retrospect, my grandmother, Sweet Tea, should have killed me by the age of 9, now but it was good though. And when I went to college and I tasted that, that Eurocentric tea, I was like, what? And then you're pouring sugar into it. You don't know that you're killing yourself. But then, 40 years later, it's like you have the diabetes talk, where this time he got some tablets for you. And you go like, nah, I'm not going out like that. I'm going to change. And I did. But that's, sadly, it's embarrassing to admit. Why did it have to take that to do something that I should have figured out, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I have people in my family that died from diabetes. Come on now,
Yeah.
So how do you begin to break those cycles? And eating the food and hanging with the family, it just feels good. It feels natural. In some ways, it's very healthy and soothing. But I think we just have to, do I need to put the whole bar of cheese on the macaroni and cheese? Do I need to, fry? My generation, they were frying. My mother saved bacon fat to fry things in. And I'm surprised that I'm still standing to talk to you today. And the flavor was all that. But I can learn, I can substitute some other stuff from a flavor profile, and learn with the olive oil that it's a far better choice than the bacon grease.
And we're basically touching on one of the questions that I had, which is how do we break and recover from the systematic things that are passed down from us from generation to generation, like saying that this is how we eat. When we get together, we eat like this. Or when we say that you shouldn't go talk to a therapist, you shouldn't tell people your business, stuff like that. How do we as a Black community like break those cycles and then recover from those things that we've been taught from generation to generation?
I think that it starts with there's a point where there's a certain theorist that talks about this. I want to say it's Kohlberg, but he talks about that moment where at first you are subscribed to what your parents think and that's what you go by, and then there becomes this duality that starts maybe around college age or so, where you start to be exposed to other ways of looking at a lot of things. And so when I look at young people and they're at that moment, I think, and it's a shame it gets to that point, but that's a time where they are really open and receptive as opposed to having that influence from their parents. I will say these days it is trending younger and younger that kids are making the choice to go speak to someone, but it begins with that mindset. So there's so many deeply ingrained thoughts about, well, take your problems to Jesus and that's it, or that we don't tell people our business, or just go to Big Mama and she has all the answers, even if they are skewed and only from her standpoint. But I think just the more that we educate ourselves and open ourselves up to the fact that there's more than one answer, then we're set up better to use these resources and get more knowledge. But a lot of times people are the first in their families, especially if they're, these days, that go to a therapist and it's still a secret in their families. So, they say it's anything else. I'm going to see the doctor. I'm just going on a run. Like, really? It's a conversation with someone of a certain skill set. If you are having heart issues, you don't go to a podiatrist, you go to a cardiologist. So if you are having struggles, it's okay and it's not crazy. I don't even use the C word. It's just a conversation with someone that's unbiased and is not going to hold that problem over you and judge you by it. So I think the more that it's normalized, then it's just regular. Like, okay, self-care Thursdays. I make it very public that on self-care Thursdays, this therapist has a therapist, and I get, I do spa things, I go work out. I can't wait to play basketball again, but it's still shut down. But all of those things are very important, and I make it public so that it's more and more just regular. Like, yes, that's what I do on Thursdays. I see 20 clients, I take 1 hour for myself. Judge me if you like, but that's your problem.
That's awesome.
I don't have anything to add to what LaShawn said. I think that you said it all perfectly. I mean, like she said, the main thing is just this podcast is a great way of being able to normalize going to see a clinician and getting another perspective and getting somebody to help you. Yeah, that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I think for myself, and just that, and I got to thank my wife for letting me fill in. I'm just trying to hold it down. So if you never see me again, it's all good though. I'm still alive and well. My wife is Dr. Carla Bailey Cooper, and she's in private practice as well. She's a clinical psychologist. But I think the other thing that she does in addition is one, you have to be aware that there are therapists that look like you out there in the universe and have skill sets. It doesn't matter to me sometimes whether it's CBT or psychoanalytic or Afro. You have a mechanism that helps people to heal. You call it whatever you want to call it. But the other thing that she does that I think is important is that she has a sliding scale, so that she does take on clients who may not have the highfalutin form of insurance, but are able to pay something. And by seeing folks in different ranges and different scales, she's able to provide services for, probably then less than what she would like to, but in part it's her commitment to, helping our people. And I think a lot of us do that. I think a lot of us do that because we care. And because we care deeply about our folks, and we know they may not have the quote so-called better insurance, but we work with them, or we do group work, or we do other kind of things that kind of helps them to heal as well. And she does that, and I just wanted to give her credit for that as well.
Just to piggyback off of what Dr. Cooper has said, one of the reasons why I brought this to the attention of my cast, and we got two other guys as well that couldn't be here, but it's because I personally went through a mental health issue, I guess you would say. And I was one of those guys to where I did not want to seek therapy because of the stigmas as far as not telling your business and not wanting to open up to people, pretty much not wanting to show emotional side. And it was in my second year of marriage that now early on in the marriage that my wife thought she knew me and I thought I knew myself. But when I was turning the age of 30, a lot of things hit me in a lot of different ways, and it overwhelmed me. And it got to the point to where I ended up seeking, well, not necessarily seeking help, but ended up being in a hospital, psychiatric hospital. And that time in there, it was about a week, and my wife was going through it with we had my 4-year-old and my oldest daughter. She was with her mother at the time, and we didn't have my son yet. And during that time, I didn't know how to feel because it was so much going on in my mind. It was from the past to the present of not being where I wanted to be in life, seeing everything that I want. It seems like I'm not able to obtain it because of the color of my skin or the way that I look or the way that I present myself. I'm this big, black, dark-skinned man, 6'5", and I always look like I have a frown on my face. But my wife can tell you that I'm one of the friendliest people that you'll ever meet. And I mean, I was actually friendliest in class of 2002, Seaford. So shout out to class. But I say all that to say that I wanted to make light of the situation to Black men to let them know that his wife, Dr. Cooper's wife, Dr. Carla Bailey Cooper, was one of the ones who helped me. And me seeking her out, I was looking for someone that looked like me, to be quite honest. And I wanted someone who would kind of understand where I was coming from, the background that I had, and she helped me through that. And one of the things that I felt that helped me the most was me getting to know myself and learning about my history and learning about the history of African people and listening to different lectures. One of my friends, he calls me a nerd. And even though I didn't make it as far as a bachelor's degree, I did attend Morgan State. And those college experiences made me open up to a whole different world. And I kind of closed that in. And just opening back up and learning different things about myself, about religion, about spirituality, about health, about marriage, love. It's brought a new awareness to me, and not saying that everyone has to take the journey that I had, but I just know that seeing a therapist started me on that journey to where even though I have still, you know what I mean, bumps here and there, for the most part, just seeking out that help was a start of me getting better. So I just wanted to make sure that people that know me, that know Dom, that know Dwayne, that know James, and anyone else out there listening to the podcast, to understand that just because you're a black man and you seem as though you're a threat to society and you have to play like you're hard, doesn't mean that you don't have to go get help.
One of the things that I'm big on, I'm glad Tomas shared this story, but one of the things I'm big on is accountability. And having accountability partners. And to me, all a therapist is, and well, I'll tell you, all the accountability partner is somebody who's unbiased, who's going to not tell you exactly what you want to hear, but tell you what you need to hear to make sure that's it's for the betterment for you, right? So that's how I look at therapy as well. Somebody that's going to hold you accountable, somebody that's going to tell you the truth, and give you actionable stepping stones to actually achieve certain goals that you said that you wanted to achieve. So that's how I view therapy: is that somebody that's just going to hold you accountable, and push you into where you said that you want to be.
Yeah, when I get Black men on my caseload, I'm like internally cheering already before I have even met them, because I know sometimes, they'll even share with me how much it took to just make the phone call or just get over the hump. And so when, especially if they seek me out, I will get into it and say, well, why did you seek me out? I'm a woman. Yes, I'm Black, but, I just wanted to get some information on that. And sometimes they're trying to work out issues that involve a woman, so they are challenging themselves in that way. But other times they just, like what they see on the profile. But either way, it gives me a lot of pride when I have someone, a Black man, that wants to explore their issues, because there's so many expectations of them, and in my office they get to just relax, and they sometimes apologize for cursing, and I'm like, no, it's your time. Like, I'm not offended. I'm a daughter of a law enforcement officer, and I've been playing basketball since I was 6 with mostly guys. Like, trust me, you're good. And so, because we can get that rhythm, they relax, and then they just grow. And so I just wanted to add that I really love when, even with Black couples, I love that also, because if they're both willing, man, we can get in there. And I use my sense of humor a lot. So like, we just make it a fun experience, but it's serious, and I can be direct and they can take it. And so I'm glad that it's trending in the right direction. And I encourage anyone to just try it out. Find someone that fits for you and just try it out one time or four times. Yeah. Give it.
So, I did have one last question, and we'll end it on this. But because you said that you were the daughter of a law enforcement, it actually segues right into my final question: is how do you guys think that the many police shootings of African American men, how that affects the mental health of a Black man today?
We need another hour.
Well,
like,
I guess that's another
so
show.
Yeah, I was gonna say, brother, that's a whole nother show. That's some history behind that. There's a whole lot behind that there, brother.
I'll disagree with the history part. It's not new. And we're talking about this for generations after generation. My generation, we were taught put your hands 10 and 2, but we were still being pulled over, and then north, south, under, Frank Rizzo in Philly, I'm sure things went, I didn't grow up in Wilmington, but you will find example after example for decade after decade related to driving while Black. I mean, we had all kinds of names for it historically, but it's not a new phenomena. I think what is more new for me, and I said this at the top of the broadcast, at the top of the hour, is to see the reaction by people who aren't African American, at least in these moments, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, be more supportive, at least in these moments outwardly, than what I'm accustomed to. And I hope it continues. I hope it's deeper, and I hope it sustains, because otherwise, we'll be killed at the rate that we have been historically, continue to be.
So just last night, I was watching on Vice TV there's a show on there that they have had. And last night was a third episode of the show, Why Do We Hate? Um, and what really struck a chord in me was in that show, they went back to the old Stanford prison experiment, right? I can't remember the name of the doctor, but Stanford, a psychologist, psychiatrist, back in the 1970s, I believe, did an experiment where he took a bunch of college students and he separated them into two groups. One group were the guards, and one group were the prisoners. And there was no, rhyme or reason to who got assigned to be the guard and who got to be the prisoner. It was supposed to last for 2 weeks, but because things got so horrible, he shut it down after 6 days, right? And so the Stanford prison experience, what it clearly discovered, okay, back in the 60s, 70s, was that when you place people in a position to oppress another group of people, then what you find is those individuals who are the oppressors, many of them will automatically assume that they are better than the people that they are oppressing, and they will look at those individuals that they are oppressing with less dignity and less respect. Okay? Some of the individuals who are in the position of the oppressor just need a little nudge by authority figures for them to assume this role, whereby which they look at themselves as being better than the group that they are oppressing. Okay? And so what does all of that mean, right? All of that means very clearly is this system of policing that is set up here in America has been designed this way for a purpose, and it operates in the way that it has been created. It has been created to oppress the minority and keep us in line, okay? And so how does that affect us? How do we deal with that? Well, some days we deal with it very well, and some days we don't deal with it very well. As we have said many times through this podcast, it is amazing the amount of the ability that the African American community has maintained to be able to continue to keep moving on and keep hope alive within us to be able to overcome all of this, right? But it is now a great opportunity for us to use, excuse me, this platform that we have to create some substantial change, right? Definitely all of us are affected when we see something like what we saw with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and now this other young man, Brooks is his name, right? We are all affected by that because the reality is that at the end of the day, there's not one Black man who goes anywhere in America who doesn't think to themselves, in many circumstances, is this going to be the circumstance where I get caught up? Is this going to be the day that I am the one that is, instead of watching an atrocity, I become the receiver or the participant in the atrocity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we must continue to uplift one another. We must continue to rely on our community of support and have these type of conversations, because this is part of the narrative that we all share. And it is important that we know that we are not dealing with this alone. Just like Dom and Tim and Dr. Cooper, I know that there is a commonality that the three of us share. And even with you, LaShawn, I know that you have your struggles as a Black female. And this is part of the Black experience. And as Dr. Cooper has said multiple times, I too am amazed at the amount of unity that we are finding in across America right now within the white community to say clearly enough is enough.
Amen.
There are definitely many within the white community who are saying, hey, listen, I would have gone along with supporting social justice if they hadn't have been all the looting, right? There's plenty of those people out there, but the majority of white America is saying very clearly, looting aside, this was an atrocity and something needs to be done. And so it is very good that we have this opportunity, and it is up to us as the Black community and our leaders to not squander this moment, because it's not going to last for long, and we may not see it again for another 20 or 30 years. And so what I have been advocating for is the members of Congress, we need to put Republican, Democrat aside, and we need to work together. We need to work together with the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to get together with the NAACP. We need to get together with the leaders of law enforcement. We need the Black caucus in Congress to get together, and we need to get some things changed of what we're going to do in order to break this system and make sure that it operates more fairly for everyone all the time, right?
Yes, sir. So, as we wrap up, when we get the final thoughts, one of the reasons why I wanted to pose that question is because we are, like I said, we all do deal with these things, and I wanted the listeners to know that the thoughts that we have, and they're valid. I mean, the way that you're feeling about what's going on in America, those things are valid. But it's okay. While it's not okay to go in and break up things, stuff like that, it's okay to talk about those things, those feelings that we actually have. Don't suppress them, and don't try to bottle them up, and don't try to hold them in. We got 3 therapists out here who are saying that come talk to me. It's okay to talk to somebody. It's okay to get those thoughts out. And nobody's going to look at you any different because you're feeling a certain way about what's going on in your life or what you've been through in your life. So that's the reason why I wanted to pose that question to you guys, to just let people know that it's okay to be angry and to be mad and to feel some type of way and feel like it's either you or me. I mean, when you're getting pulled over by a cop, it's okay to have those feelings and to have those thoughts. But just talking to somebody about them will help you alleviate some of the stress that you've gone through. But what we're going to do is the final part of the show is just the final thoughts before we wrap up. So I'll go ahead and start with Dr. Cooper. If you had any final thoughts on that you wanted to get out there.
Yeah, just to thank you for the opportunity, and just to mention again, my wife is in private practice in Wilmington. That's Dr. Carla Bailey Cooper, and you can find her. But thanks for the opportunity. I'm always uplifted when I see everybody's younger than me these days, but younger brothers and sisters out here doing this work. I don't care if it's by podcast. I don't care if it's by private practice. This is kind of what it takes. And it kind of takes younger people to see younger people identify with, you know, hey, I had some problems too, and this is how I dealt with them, and this is what helped me. And I'll finally say, remember, I started the broadcast by saying my father killed himself in front of me at 25. And so I wish he would have gotten help. And I didn't see his suicide letter until I was in my 50s. And there was a brother that was clearly in pain. And if he could have only gotten the help that he would have desperately needed with his depression and post-traumatic stress disorder that he had as well, then, you know, he would be here today. So I applaud the effort and I applaud what you're doing. And it's been a pleasure really talking with you all about these subjects and important matters.
Thank you, Doc. Dr. Waters.
I mean, I just appreciate being asked to join this subject. It's so important. I'm the co-owner of a private practice in Newark, and there are 4 of us there. It's Black owned, it's women owned, and we have also a diverse set of therapists. So if you want a male, there's also a male there, and we're still expanding. But beyond that, this work is so important. I want to shout out also paging Dr. Shonda. If you look her up on Instagram, she made this shirt. I just got it today. It says,
Yeah, mental health matters. Yes.
Yes. And so just came in the mail. I was like, this is perfect. But I mean, it does. And we have to help each other. So like everyone said, it's okay to talk to someone else. Your business stays there. And it can really be a very just reassuring experience. It's not so like up in the clouds and just heady. It's really all about what you need. And there are plenty of people out here to help that look like us, which I know is important. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for having me.
Thank you guys. Dr. Stu?
Yes, let me first thank Dr. Cooper and Dr. soon to be Dr. Waters. Let me thank you for your putting up with me. I'm sure I talked more than I should have, and I apologize. I just get excited sometimes. But on a serious note, the one thing that I wanted to just say in closing, I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, working with veterans, and we make up minorities a great portion of military service members. And there are lots of resources out there for veterans that most veterans are not taking advantage of. And so I would just say to all veterans out there, regardless of ethnicity, if you're listening, if you're in need, if you are having struggles, definitely come to the VA and we have services available for you. And you can, if you are a person of color and you do not feel comfortable with the Caucasians or the other ethnicities that they're offering to you, you can very simply say that I don't feel comfortable meeting with this clinician and I would like to have someone of the same color. And we're obligated to try and make an effort to get you matched with someone that you can be comfortable with. So go to the VA, speak up, take advantage of the services that are available to you. Again, Dom and Tim, I want to tell you, thank you for putting this podcast together and thank you for including me. I certainly have enjoyed myself and would welcome to come back with Dr. Cooper and Dr. Waters another time. Just give us a ring.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate you guys accepting the invite. I mean, it's I mean, this podcast is really we brought it together for Black men. We mainly talk about sports and about culture, music, and things like that. But we also get serious as well. And this is one of the serious topics that we wanted to address. but we definitely appreciate you guys' expertise. And we will have a podcast about Black women health as well. We are not going to neglect the females, trust me. So if you guys want to come on as well, we can do that again. But Dom, go ahead and lead us on out, brother.
I'll be taking notes on that one. No, I won't be on, but I'll be taking.
Me too. Trust me. Me too as well.
So maybe I have my wife host that show. But
Don't get
my
yourself
final
in
thought,
trouble anymore.
yeah, I know. My final thoughts are you don't have to be a product of your environment. You don't have to be a product of what you see your parents go through or what you see the people closest to you go through. There are resources out there that we need to tap into, and don't hold everything in. Don't just go off of what your grandmom say or your mom say or your great grandmom say, right? Don't go off those stigmas. Search it out for yourself, research it for yourself, and then take action. You don't have to be like everybody else in your family. You don't have to be from generation to generation going through depression or whatever it is that we're going through as a Black community. Speak out, find somebody who is willing to listen, find a therapist if that's what's needed. But those are my closing remarks. Don't be a product of what you've seen. And until next time, well, before I close out, follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube. We do have our Facebook channel, and we also do have our Spotify channel. So follow us on any of those platforms.
I hear you, Dami. What is it? Dalai Lama? Dami Lama? That's what we'll start calling you, Dami Lama. He got that wisdom for us. Go ahead.
but also before we close out, I do want to we will have the informations of the practices that are in Wilmington and the practices that are in Newark. So that way, if our listeners do want to actually reach out and get help, we will actually have that information available as well. So Tim will get that information from you guys, and we'll actually put that on our page. So that way, if our viewers do have if this did reach somebody and they want to reach out, we'll get their information to you guys. Okay. But that is our show for the day. We want to say thank you. If you have any topic that you guys want to talk about, feel free to reach out to us. But until next time, speak on any topic that you want. Speak on it.